No mail-order bride lasted 1 week with the mountain man. Until the obese one refused to leave. Let's dive into this interesting story. The story always began with whispers. Around campfires in dusty saloons, and on the lips of tired travelers who stopped for a drink and a tale. They spoke of Elias Cutter, the mountain man. A figure half man, half myth, who lived where the pines were so tall they seemed to scrape the belly of heaven, and the air was so thin it could freeze your lungs if you weren't careful. He had built his cabin with his own hands, they said. Axed down the trees, hauled the stone, roofed it with timber so thick no winter storm could tear it away. He hunted his own meat, trapped his own furs, and when he came down from the high country to trade, the people of the valley watched him like a bear wandering into town. He was huge. Broad-shouldered, thick-bearded, with eyes that looked like they had seen too much. The kind of eyes that didn't beg for friendship and didn't offer it either. But it wasn't his size or his silence that made him a legend. It was the women. Every few months, the stagecoach would arrive carrying another hopeful bride. They came in white gloves and bonnets, with nervous smiles and fragile hands. All of them had read his letters, though most admitted later they weren't sure if Elias had actually written them himself, or if some slick mail-order agent had just promised too much. Either way they came. And just as quickly, they left. Some left crying. Others left angry. Some slipped away at dawn without a word. But not a single one lasted more than a week with the mountain man. Rumors spread. Some said he was cruel. Others said he was wild. A few whispered that he wanted a servant, not a wife. But the truth was harder to pin down than the wind. Still the story grew. By the time the seventh bride had fled in the dead of night, Elias Cutter was branded as cursed. A man no woman could tame. A man destined to live and die alone in the high country. That's how the tale began. But this story doesn't belong to those women. It belongs to the one who didn't leave. The day she arrived, the air was cold, though it wasn't yet winter. The stagecoach rattled over the rocky trail, the horses sweating as they hauled the heavy load up the slope. Inside, Clara Belle smoothed the folds of her plain gray dress and stared out the window at the mountains rising higher and higher. She wasn't dainty. She wasn't slim. Clara had always been bigger than the other girls back home, round in the face, broad in the hips, with hands better suited for kneading bread and washing laundry than fluttering fans at a ball. The children had laughed at her. The men had ignored her. And her family, well, they had made it clear enough. She was a burden they could not afford to keep. So when the letter came, promising a husband and a home in the mountains, Clara didn't think twice. She packed her few belongings and climbed aboard. The driver, a leathery old man with a crooked hat, spat tobacco out the window and gave her a look halfway between pity and warning. "You sure you want this, miss?" he muttered. "They say no bride lasts up there with him. The mountain swallows em whole." Clara's chin lifted. "I've been swallowed before. Came out just fine." The driver grunted. He'd driven dozens of brides up this trail. He'd driven every one of them back down again too. When the coach finally creaked to a halt, Clara stepped out onto the hard-packed earth. The air was thin, sharp, and filled with the scent of pine. Ahead, leaning against a split-rail fence, stood Elias Cutter. The stories had not exaggerated. He was massive, his beard long and unkempt, his shirt stretched tight across his chest from years of chopping wood and hauling stone. His arms were bare, corded with muscle, scarred by old fights with man or beast. His eyes, icy pale gray, studied her in silence. Most women shrank under that stare. Clara did not. She tightened her grip on her carpet bag, squared her shoulders and marched forward. Elias didn't move. He didn't smile. He didn't even offer a greeting. "Well?" Clara said, planting her feet. "You gonna help me with my bags, or are we starting this marriage with me carrying all the weight?" The driver choked on his own spit, expecting Elias to roar, to scowl, to send her packing right then and there. But Elias only blinked. Slowly he stepped forward, lifted the bag as though it weighed nothing, and turned toward the narrow path leading up to the cabin. He didn't speak, didn't look back, just started walking. Clara followed, the crunch of her boots steady on the gravel. Behind them, the driver shook his head. "Poor woman," he muttered. "She'll be gone before the week's out. Mark my words." But Clara didn't hear him. And even if she had, she wouldn't have cared. Because Clara Belle was not like the others. And Elias Cutter, the mountain man, was about to learn that for the first time in his life, he had met a woman who refused to leave. The trail up to Elias Cutter's cabin was no gentle walk. It climbed steep and narrow, winding through pine forests where the trees leaned close like watchful sentinels. The air thinned, sharp and biting, carrying the distant cry of hawks circling the valley below. Elias walked ahead, his long stride forcing Clara to quicken her pace. He didn't look back to see if she struggled. He didn't ask if she was keeping up. That was the mountain man's way, silent, hard, and indifferent. But Clara was not the wilting sort. Her dress snagged on branches, her breath grew heavy, her boots pressed blisters into her heels, but she pressed on, eyes locked on the wide back of the man who was supposed to be her husband. At last, the trees broke open into a clearing. There it was, the infamous cabin. It stood strong, hewn from thick logs, its chimney sending a faint wisp of smoke into the sky. Stacks of firewood lined the side, pelts of bear and elk hung drying on racks. It wasn't a home so much as a fortress against the wilderness. Clara stopped, hands on her hips, taking it in. "So this is where brides come to die," she muttered under her breath. Elias heard her. His head turned just enough for his icy eyes to catch hers. "They left because they weren't built for it," he said flatly. His voice was deep, gravelly, like rocks rolling down a mountain slope. "If you're smart, you'll do the same before winter sets in." Clara sniffed, unimpressed. "You don't scare me, mountain man. I've lived through worse than cold walls and hard work." He said nothing more, just pushed open the heavy cabin door. Inside, the place was everything she expected. Rough-hewn furniture, a wide stone fireplace, animal skins thrown over the floorboards. No curtains. No softness. Just survival. Elias dropped her bag by the corner. "You'll cook, mend, and keep the fire. I'll hunt, chop, and keep the wolves off the door. Don't expect more than that." Clara raised her brows. "Well now, isn't that a romantic welcome?" Elias scowled, turning his back to her as he pulled a knife from its sheath and began sharpening it on a whetstone. The scraping sound filled the silence. But Clara wasn't about to be silenced. She set her bonnet down, brushed the dust from her skirts, and marched straight to the hearth. "Fire's low," she announced. "I'll stoke it before the room freezes." She gathered logs, split them neatly with a small hatchet by the wall, and soon had the fire crackling to life. The glow lit her face, bringing warmth into the cabin for the first time since she'd entered. Elias paused in his sharpening. His eyes flickered toward her, just for a moment. None of the others had done that, not without complaint, not without trembling. They had shivered, they had cried, they had begged to go home. But this woman, she acted like she belonged. Clara caught him watching and smirked. "What? Surprised I know how to split a log? You think being round means being useless?" Elias grunted, not answering. But inside, something stirred, something he didn't like admitting. He was used to women fearing him or flattering him or running from him. This one stood her ground. Later, as the sun dipped low, he tossed her a rough wool blanket. "You'll take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire." Clara blinked. "You're giving up your bed?" "It's yours now," he said simply. Her lips curved into a half-smile. For all his roughness, the man had a strange code of honor. When night fell, Clara lay under the heavy quilt, staring at the log ceiling above her. She could hear Elias breathing steady by the fire, the crackle of embers filling the silence. Outside, wolves howled, their cries carrying through the trees. For the first time since she'd left home, Clara didn't feel unwanted. The cabin was rough. The man was gruffer. But something about this place felt like it was testing her, daring her to endure. And Clara had never once walked away from a dare. The next morning came cold and sharp. Elias was already outside when she rose, splitting wood with a swing so powerful each log cracked in a single blow. His shirt clung to his shoulders with sweat despite the chill. Clara opened the door, rubbed the sleep from her eyes and called, "Well, if you're planning to work me to death, you'd better let me eat first." He stopped mid-swing, axe buried in a stump. Slowly, a corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. "Breakfast then," he said. That small exchange was the first crack in the wall between them. Clara didn't know it yet, but she had just done what no bride before her had managed. She hadn't cried. She hadn't begged. She hadn't run. She had stood in his cabin, looked the mountain man in the eye and refused to be dismissed. And Elias Cutter, for the first time in years, wasn't sure whether he wanted her gone, or whether he wanted her to stay. The first week on the mountain tested more than just muscle. It tested patience. The cabin was small, the work endless, and Elias Cutter's silence could smother the air like smoke. He wasn't a man of words, he was a man of motion. He rose before dawn, shouldered his rifle, and disappeared into the timberline to hunt. By the time he returned, bloodied game slung over his shoulders, Clara had already scrubbed the floor, mended socks, and put on a pot of stew. But what grated on her wasn't the labor, it was his constant criticism. "That fire's too low. You split the logs too short. You put the stew on too early. No matter what she did, he had something to say. Clara would slam down the spoon, plant her fists on her wide hips, and glare at him across the cabin. You know, for a man who lives alone, you sure do complain a lot. If I'm so useless, maybe you ought to cook your own supper. Elias barely lifted his head from sharpening his knife. If I wanted it wrong, I'd cook it myself, he said. That was the way of things for days, his bluntness colliding with her stubbornness. One afternoon, Clara found herself outside splitting wood. She wasn't graceful at it, but she was determined. Her arms ached, sweat beaded on her brow, but she brought the hatchet down again and again. Elias came striding from the trees with a fresh kill, an elk heavy and massive. He stopped, watching her swing. "You're gonna dull the blade," he said flatly. Clara dropped the hatchet and spun on him. "I'm gonna do the work, dull blade or not. Not all of us have biceps carved out of stone, mountain man." He blinked at her outburst. Most women had cried under his tone. She raised her voice instead. Then she marched over, grabbed one end of the elk's antlers and said, "Well? Don't just stand there, let's drag the beast inside before the wolves sniff it." For a moment, Elias didn't move. Then for the first time a sound left his chest, not quite a laugh but something close. A low rumble of surprise. Together they hauled the elk to the butchering block. Elias worked the knife with quick precision, and Clara stood at his side, sleeves rolled high, ready to help. Blood spattered her apron, but she didn't flinch. She salted the meat, packed it, and when the job was done, she wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "There," she said breathlessly. "Now that wasn't so hard, was it?" A man and his wife working together instead of barking orders. Elias glanced at her, those pale gray eyes narrowing. For the first time there was no scorn in them, only something unreadable. That evening the clash between them came to a boil. The wind had picked up, rattling the shutters. The stew bubbled thick in the pot, filling the cabin with the rich scent of elk meat and onions. Clara ladled a portion into a bowl and set it before Elias. He tasted it, then grunted. "Too much salt." That was it. That was the breaking straw. Clara snatched the bowl back, slammed it onto the table, and leaned forward until her face was inches from his. "You listen to me," Elias cut her. "I don't scare easy. I don't cry easy. And I sure as don't cook for a man who thinks nitpicking is conversation. If you want to sit there and stew in silence, fine. But don't you dare act like I came all this way just to be your cook and your punching bag." The fire cracked in the hearth, punctuating her words. For a long moment, Elias didn't move. His jaw worked, his eyes locked on hers. Then, slow as snow sliding off a roof, something shifted in his gaze. He leaned back, folded his massive arms and said, "You're the first one to raise your voice to me." Clara didn't blink. "Then maybe you needed someone to." The silence that followed wasn't the tense, heavy kind that had filled the cabin before. It was different. It was charged. Like the air before a storm. Elias pushed the bowl back toward her. "It's good," he muttered. "I'll eat it." Clara's lips twitched into a smirk. Right you will." Later that night, as she lay under the quilt, Clara thought about the clash. It hadn't broken her, it had steadied her. For the first time she felt like Elias had seen her, not just another bride passing through, but a woman who stood her ground. And though he said nothing more before sleep, Elias lay awake on the bearskin rug, staring at the ceiling beams. The others had run. This one had fought. And that, more than anything, unsettled the mountain man. The first snow came early that year. Thin flakes at first, swirling lazily in the gray October sky. Then more. Thicker. Heavier. By the end of the week, the mountain was blanketed in white, the trees bowed under the weight, and the little cabin sat like a lone outpost against the storm. Elias Cutter had seen winters like this before. He knew what they meant. He doubled his hunts, hauling back elk, rabbit, whatever he could trap. Clara salted and dried the meat, packed it in crocks and stacked jars high against the wall. The fire burned day and night, the woodpile shrinking faster than she liked. Still she didn't complain. Every evening, as the wind howled like wolves through the eaves, she kept the fire alive, ladled stew into bowls, and hummed old hymns while she worked. Elias said little. He sat sharpening his knife or mending traps, his presence steady, his silence thick. But then came the blizzard. It roared down from the high peaks like the breath of some great beast. Snow hurled itself against the cabin walls, the shutters rattled, the roof groaned under the weight. For 3 days they were sealed in, the door buried behind a drift taller than Clara. By the second day the food supplies already looked lean. Elias chewed quietly on the last of the jerky. Clara saw the way his shoulders tightened, the way his eyes flicked to the dwindling pile of provisions. That night she made a thin broth, barely enough to warm the belly. She set Elias's bowl in front of him, then filled her own only halfway. He noticed. His spoon paused midair. "You didn't take your share." Clara shrugged, blowing steam from her bowl. "I don't need much. Besides, a man who chops wood and fights wolves burns more than a woman who stitches socks." His eyes narrowed. "Don't starve yourself." "I'm not," she lied, lifting another spoonful. "I've had less and lived." Elias studied her for a long moment. He wasn't used to lies, he was used to silence or excuses or tears. This was different. This was sacrifice. The next night she did it again. She ate less, gave more to him, and even slipped a scrap to his hunting dog, Bristle, who whined at her side. This time Elias slammed his spoon down. The sharp sound made Clara jump. "You'll starve yourself before you quit, won't you?" he growled. Clara's chin lifted. Her eyes flashed with fire against the glow of the hearth. "Better to starve than to live as a coward," she shot back. The words struck him harder than the storm outside. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, staring at her. No one had ever spoken to him that way. For the first time in years, Elias Cutter had no answer. The blizzard raged on. The cabin grew colder. The walls groaned as if the mountain itself wanted to crush them. One night, Clara woke to find Elias still awake, sitting by the fire, his broad shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the flames. For the first time he looked less like a mountain and more like a man, tired, worn, and carrying a weight too heavy for one set of shoulders. She sat up, pulling the quilt tighter around her. "You don't sleep much, do you?" His jaw worked before he answered. "Sleep don't come easy when you're waiting for the roof to fall in." Clara studied him. "You've been alone too long." He turned, those gray eyes catching the firelight. "And you've been hurt too much." The silence that followed wasn't sharp, wasn't cold, it was warm, fragile, like the quiet between two people who finally stopped fighting the wind and simply listened. By the fourth day the storm broke. The world outside was white and still, the drifts piled high, the sky pale with weak sun. Elias dug a path to the woodpile, his body steaming with sweat despite the frost. Clara stood in the doorway, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching. For the first time since she had arrived, she didn't see just the wild mountain man. She saw a protector, a man who stood between her and a world that wanted her gone. And for the first time, Elias Cutter admitted to himself that maybe, just maybe, the woman in his cabin wasn't a burden. She wasn't another failure waiting to leave. She was his match. The breaking point hadn't broken her. It had bound her tighter to the mountain. And deep down, though he'd never say it out loud, Elias felt a dangerous truth forming in his chest. He didn't want her to leave. The storm had passed, but winter was far from over. Snow clung stubbornly to the trees, the river froze in patches, and the cabin walls creaked with every sharp wind. But the blizzard had done something neither of them expected. It had cracked the silence between them. Before, Clara had worked and hummed, and Elias had grunted and sharpened knives. But now, there were words. Short ones at first, dropped like stones into the stillness. "Pass the salt." "You missed a stitch." "Dog needs feeding." Small, ordinary things. Yet to Clara they felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. One evening Elias returned late, dragging a brace of rabbits behind him. His beard was frosted, his hands raw from the cold. Clara had the fire blazing, stew already simmering. "Let me see those hands," she said as he set the rabbits on the block. He frowned and used to being ordered. "They're fine." "They're red as boiled crawfish," she said firmly, grabbing one of his massive hands before he could pull away. His skin was rough, calloused, and warm despite the cold. She rubbed balm across his knuckles, the kind she'd made from fat and herbs earlier that week. Elias sat stiff as a statue watching her. No one had touched him in years. Not kindly, not without fear. When she finished, she looked up and said simply, "There. Even a mountain needs tending now and then." Something flickered in his pale eyes, and for once he didn't argue. The days grew into a rhythm. Elias taught her how to skin a rabbit properly, guiding her hand with surprising patience. Clara showed him how to stretch flour by baking biscuits that filled the cabin with warmth and comfort. At night, when the wind moaned, they found themselves sitting closer to the fire, the silence less heavy. One evening Clara began to hum, low and steady, an old hymn her mother used to sing. Elias tilted his head, listening. "You sing," he said, more observation than question. "Better than you, I'd wager," she teased. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest thing she'd seen yet. "You call that singing?" he muttered, shaking his head. But the faintest warmth lingered in his voice. Later that week, Clara teased him again while he shaved the frost from his beard with a hunting knife. Careful with that thing. One slip and you'll be half a beard short. Then what will the mountain folk call you? Grizzly bear? Patchy goat? Elias raised an eyebrow. I could grow a new beard in a week. Well, she said, lips quirking, let's hope it's faster than the time it takes you to smile. That earned her a rumble from his chest, a sound so low and strange she realized with a start that he was laughing. It wasn't much. Just a single rough chuckle. But it shook the cabin walls more than the storm ever had. One night, as they sat by the fire, Elias finally asked the question that had been simmering between them. Why'd you come here? His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. You heard the stories. You knew no bride stayed. Clara poked the fire with the iron rod, sparks leaping. Her face softened, shadows flickering across her cheeks. Because nowhere else wanted me, she said simply. Back home I was too much of everything. Too big. Too loud. Too stubborn. They told me I'd die an old maid and I believed them. So when I got the chance to come here I thought, if I'm going to be unwanted, I'd rather be unwanted where the air is clean and a man works honest. Her voice cracked just slightly at the end, though she tried to hide it. Elias didn't speak right away. He stared at her, studying the lines of her face, the steadiness in her eyes. And for the first time in years he felt something heavy press against his chest. Not loneliness, but the realization of just how deep his own solitude had carved into him. Finally he said in a low voice, You're not unwanted here. Clara blinked. What did you say? But he didn't repeat himself. He just reached for his knife, sharpening stone in hand, though his strokes were slower, less sure. Still Clara heard it. And it sank deep. That night as she lay under the quilt, Clara thought of his words. They weren't romantic, not flowery. But they meant more than any sweet lies ever could. And Elias, lying on the bearskin rug, stared at the fire long after it burned low, wondering when this woman had begun to soften the stone inside him. He had spent years building walls higher than the mountain peaks. But Clara Belle, stubborn and unshakable, was quietly climbing them. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to stop her. The thaw came slow. Snow melted in patches, dripping from branches, leaving the ground soft and muddy. The forest animals stirred again, and with them came whispers of men, the kind Elias knew too well. He'd been watching the smoke rise from the valley for days now. Strangers camping too close to his hunting grounds. Men who took without asking. Men who didn't believe in leaving well enough alone. Clara noticed it first in Elias's shoulders. He grew tense. His movements sharper. He paced more at night, listening, eyes flicking toward the woods. Finally, one afternoon as Clara was scrubbing clothes by the riverbank, Elias appeared out of the trees, rifle slung across his back. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said, scanning the treeline. Clara blinked. What? What's out there? Men, he muttered. Just that one word, heavy as thunder. That night the air thickened with unease. Clara could feel it as she cooked supper. Elias kept glancing at the window, every shadow outside stirring his instincts. Finally she put down the ladle and faced him. You've been restless for days. Tell me the truth, Elias. He hesitated. He wasn't used to explaining himself, especially not to a woman. But Clara wasn't just anyone now. She was here. With him. There are men in the valley. Drifters. They take what they want. Food. Furs. Women. The word women hung in the air, sharp as a knife. Clara's chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. And you think they'll come here? His eyes met hers. They'll try. The next morning proved him right. Clara was hanging laundry to dry when she spotted them. 3 rough-looking men climbing up the slope, rifles slung careless over their shoulders, grins wide and ugly. Afternoon, miss, one called. Didn't know the mountain man kept such a pretty housekeeper. Clara's hand stilled on the sheet, heart thudding. Before she could answer, Elias stepped out of the cabin, rifle already in his hands. You're trespassing. His voice was low, a growl that rumbled like an approaching storm. The tallest man smirked. Easy now. We just came to visit. Maybe share a drink. Maybe more. His gaze slid back to Clara in a way that made her stomach twist. Elias cocked the rifle without hesitation. The metallic click echoed through the clearing. Leave. Now. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the tallest man laughed and spat in the snow. Fine. But don't think you can keep us out forever. Sooner or later, mountain man, everybody bends. They backed away, slow and mocking, their laughter carrying down the slope until it faded into the trees. Inside the cabin, Clara's hands shook as she poured water. She didn't want to admit it, but the men's words lingered, sour in her chest. "They'll be back, won't they?" she whispered. Elias sat at the table, cleaning his rifle with steady, deliberate strokes. His jaw was tight, eyes stormy. "They'll be back," he said. "And they'll learn." Clara swallowed. "Elias, maybe I should go. Maybe I'm making things worse for you. If they weren't after me." He slammed the rifle shut, the sound making her jump. "No," his voice was sharp, then softened as he looked at her. "You're not leaving." Clara's breath caught. "But you think I can't handle a few valley rats?" His eyes burned into hers. "You stayed when no one else did. You faced me. Faced this life. If they think they can take you from me, they'll find out what it means to fight a mountain." That night, the cabin was heavy with silence. Not the cold silence of strangers anymore, but the taut silence of two people waiting for a storm to break. Clara sat by the fire, her mending forgotten in her lap. She stole glances at Elias as he sharpened his hunting knife. His shoulders were broad, his movements sure, and for the first time she felt the strange comfort of knowing someone like him stood between her and danger. But she also knew this wasn't just about survival. It was about belonging. About whether she truly had a place here with this man who lived half wild and half wounded. As the wind howled outside, Elias finally broke the silence. "They'll come again, Clara. And when they do, you'll see. I'm not letting you go." That night, as Clara lay awake beneath the quilt, her pulse quickened not from fear, but from something else. Something new and unfamiliar. For the first time since stepping foot on the mountain, she realized she wasn't thinking about how to leave. She was thinking about how to stay. The mountain was quiet for 3 days. Too quiet. Elias felt it in his bones, the storm before the storm. He rose earlier, checked his rifle twice and laid fresh logs by the door. Clara noticed the tension in every line of him, though he said little. On the 4th morning, the silence shattered. Dogs barked first, sharp and frantic. Then came the crunch of boots on frozen ground. Clara dropped the bread dough she was kneading, her hands stiff with flour. "Elias," she whispered. He was already at the door, rifle in hand. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned like flint. "Stay behind me." 3 men came up the slope, the same ones but this time with 2 more. They carried rifles and one held a coil of rope. Well, the tall one sneered, stepping forward. "Told you we'd be back. The mountain man's hiding a wife now. Ain't fair for him to keep all the sweetness for himself." Clara's heart hammered, but she stood firm. She'd faced worse words in town, whispered and sneered behind her back. But here, with Elias before her, she wasn't about to shrink. Elias raised his rifle. "You step 1 foot closer and you'll leave in the ground." The men laughed, spreading out, circling like wolves. Then everything happened fast. One man lunged left, another right. Elias fired, the crack echoing through the pines, dropping one of them to his knees with a scream. The others surged forward. Clara's body moved before her mind caught up. She grabbed the iron poker from the fire and swung hard as one man tried to grab her arm. The poker connected with his jaw with a sickening crack and he stumbled back, cursing. Elias fought like the mountain itself, raw, unmovable, relentless. He slammed one man into the wall, fists breaking bone, while his rifle but crashed into another's skull. "Clara," he shouted, tossing her a hunting knife. She caught it clumsily, heart in her throat. A man charged at her and for the first time in her life she didn't freeze. She slashed, not deep but enough. He roared and fled bleeding into the trees. The fight was brutal, chaotic, but short. Mountain law was always swift. When the smoke cleared, 2 men limped away, dragging the wounded. The others lay groaning in the snow, too broken to rise. Elias stood in the middle of it all, chest heaving, blood streaking his knuckles. His gaze flicked instantly to Clara. "You hurt." She shook her head, clutching the knife with trembling hands. "No, not a scratch." And then, without thinking, she laughed. A wild, breathless laugh that surprised even herself. "Lord above, Elias, I thought I'd faint, but I didn't." For a long moment, Elias just looked at her. Really looked. Her hair was tangled, her apron torn, her cheeks flushed with life. But she was still standing. Fierce. Unmovable. "You're not afraid," he said almost to himself. Clara lifted her chin, still breathless. "I was. But I stayed." Something in him broke then. The walls he'd built higher than the peaks, the silence he'd carried heavier than stone. In 2 strides he was in front of her, his massive hand cupping her face, rough thumb brushing her cheek. "You stayed," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "No one ever stayed." Clara's eyes shone, wet but unwavering. "Then let me be the first." And in that moment, Elias bent and kissed her, not soft, not timid, but raw and claiming, the kind of kiss a man gives when he's found something he thought the world had stolen from him. She clung to him, not minding the blood on his shirt or the smoke in the air. For the first time since her parents had shipped her away as a mail-order bride, Clara Belle felt exactly where she belonged. When they finally broke apart, Elias rested his forehead against hers. His voice was a whisper meant only for her. "This mountain's hard. I'm harder. But if you'll have me, Clara, I swear you'll never face it alone." Her lips curved into a trembling smile. "I didn't come here to leave, Elias. I came to live. And I think I just found where life begins." The sun broke through the clouds, lighting the clearing where blood and snow mingled. The intruders were gone. The danger had passed. And for the first time the mountain didn't feel like a cage of silence, it felt like home. Clara Belle had lasted longer than a week. She had lasted through storms, through silence, through fire. And in the heart of a man no bride had tamed, she had planted herself like an oak. The woman who refused to leave had become the woman he would never let go.